Hi, everyone. We're going to wait just a second to let everyone get a chance to come in, and then we'll start. We're glad to have you with us today. Here they come. Great. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for being with us today. I first would like to acknowledge our 2021 Diamond sponsors. We have CertaPro Painters of St. Charles, South County, West County, O'Connor Insurance Agency, Premier Roofing Company, and the Daniel and Henry Company. Thank you guys for helping support us and being our Diamond sponsors. Today, we're excited to have two fantastic presenters. We have Ms. Dawn Bauman. Thank you, Dawn, for being here. The Senior Vice President of Government and Public Affairs at CEI National. So we always get really excited when we have somebody from National on, Dawn. So thanks for being here. And we have Todd Billy with the Community Association Lawyers, powered by Saybrook Phoenix. And me and Stacy will be taking care of questions at the end. So save questions for the end. You can post them anytime in the under the Q&A or under the chat, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. So I am going to hand it off to Todd to start the presentation.
And I'm going to throw Dawn a curveball because I think it's fun to do that in the beginning of any presentation. Dawn, do you just want to briefly give a background as to how CAI National fits in with the national, especially on the government stuff? Because, I mean, I've known you now for many years, but, you know, many other people haven't, so.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hi, Todd, Kathy, Stacy. It's so good to be here and with 70 of my new best friends. Great to see you. So CAI is an international organization, national organization predominantly, and we have 60 chapters throughout the US. From a government affairs standpoint, advocacy, we have a federal legislative action committee and do a bit of work at the federal level. Probably about 15% of our advocacy work is at a federal level. But as most of you know, the laws that impact community associations are predominantly at the state level. So we have 36 legislative action committees, one in Missouri, and in other states as well. And the way we do our advocacy work is the organization as a whole, with the investment and input from all of our members, especially our legislative action committees, we develop public policies that give a framework for how our legislative action committees can work within the legislature on a variety of issues. We have about 50 public policies on things like reserves and a collection of delinquent assessments and short-term rentals and electric vehicle charging stations, et cetera. So we work together as a team nationally and locally to do the best that we can to represent the interests of our members at the local and federal governments. Hope that helps, Todd, and thanks for the curveball.
No, you're welcome. And yeah, Dawn and Phoebe, we work with the most. They're absolutely fabulous and a pleasure to work with, and it makes it easier because in Missouri, our window is so short in the legislature that when they do hear from us, our hair is really on fire. So let's go ahead and get, oh yeah, go ahead.
So most state legislative sessions are less than 90 days long. So Missouri is in good company.
Well, I don't know if that makes me feel better or not, but certainly makes your job more fun. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to do the questions at the end, get them in the chat. Stacy's going to be helping us with that. The goal isn't to try to rush through it, but the goal is to kind of set the guardrails, because there are some questions that you guys are going to have that even today, we just don't have the answers to. We are not fully aware yet of exactly how the lenders and the loan originators are going to adjust to it. So a lot of what we're trying to do is create the foundation. So once we have a better idea of what lenders are going to do, we can adapt. So scope of the problem, CA's Condominium Safety Public Policy Report, which just came out. And Dawn's going to really focus on that. It is worth printing and reading every single word just to get educated onto what's going on, because it does impact all of us. Then I'll get into the secondary mortgage market, which is really where this kind of starts. The Fannie Mae letter, which is what has caused us to hurry up and do this for everyone, and then ultimately, what's the goal? So the scope of the problem is pretty simple. Structures do not last forever. Multifamily is more akin to commercial structures than traditional single-family homes, just in the way they're built. Even if you look at, it's easier to see, just around St. Louis, I tend to see just more apartments going up faster. And if you look at their construction, it is not like a single-family home, detached home. These things are more akin to commercial structures. There are actually, when it comes to insurance for these professionals, multifamily is actually considered high risk for architects, engineers, and contractors. And the reason is because they really are commercial structures. And if it gets wrong, they're very, very expensive, particularly, especially what we see in Missouri when we have building issues. It's almost always a building envelope issue. Well, if there's a design issue, now you have the architect. So we have to recognize that we are not for HOAs that are single family detached. Yeah, you probably are traditional stick frame, no big deal. A lot of condominiums are not. And that's the focus of all the Fannie Mae regulations. So if you're thinking about that this applies to an HOA, it's still good background to understand the scope of the problem, but this only applies to condos. So then you also get the marketplace incentives and personal decisions. And what I mean by that is, I go to law seminar every year, and every year we have great national speakers. And no matter what, there's always something that comes out of it that I just didn't anticipate when you look at the title. And one of the last ones was dealing with, we're dealing with marketplace incentives and how we make personal decisions and what we do when we invest. And it came from the Smart Towns, I think it was last year. I'm sorry, it might have been the year before. Where essentially, if we think about it, and I'll just give an example for St. Louis. If we look at North St. Louis, and you have a home there, and we drive by them, sadly, on Interstate 70, you can see them. And often questions, well, why don't people try to invest in their home? Well, put yourself in those shoes. Economically, it doesn't make sense. Why would I invest a new roof in a home where I'm not even going to get close to the resale value of that investment? There's no marketplace incentive for me to invest in a home that I will not get the value out of. So what ends up happening is there's marketplace incentives to do that. You also get the personal decisions of, one, I may not have the money to do it. Two, no one's forcing me to do it. Of three, my decision and my choice may not be the best economically for everybody, but that's a decision I'm making. So, for example, we all have a family member who's probably had a house that we look at and we're like, well, that's kind of interesting how you did your add-ons and you just kept adding on without really any cohesiveness. Well, what ends up happening is the marketplace ends up creating the incentive where it makes that house harder to sell. So when we look at marketplace incentives and personal decisions, we have to recognize that there are other things going on that make it less likely for us to want to invest. The most common one we hear in condos, especially in older communities, is why would I pay for a 10-year loan on a new roof when I'm not going to be around for it? And that it's just very, very hard. But that is a personal decision and a marketplace incentive that does that. So scope of the problem is it's fascinating, but it's part of the nature of the beast that we sometimes forget. So talking about the secondary mortgage market, one way to think about it is I actually think of the Simpsons episode where they're talking about What a Wonderful Life instead of the actual movie. But banks and secondary mortgage market's pretty simple. A borrower obtains a loan from a loan originator. We used to go just down to the corner, go to the bank, you knew someone, you got your loan. And the bank held on to it. That's in The Wonderful Life when he talks about, the bank's money isn't tied, it's not sitting in the back. It's not like there's mattresses back there. The bank reinvests it in the community through loans. That hasn't changed with the loan origination, okay? The loan originator has no desire to have the funds tied up, though, in just the borrower's mortgage. So after the Great Depression, and we start to have really what we can think of as modern mortgage markets, we start to develop this system of, well, wait a second, if I'm a bank and I only have $1 million to borrow, once that $1 million is gone, I have no way to make more loans for people who really do qualify. So to ensure the borrower who makes the loan now wants to sell it off to recoup that $1 million to make additional loans. And that's why it's called the secondary mortgage market. The first market is loan origination. Secondary mortgage market is replenishing of the funds to make those loans. But as an investor, I need to make sure that those loans are good. I need to make sure that those loans have certain standards in there. Otherwise, you're not going to get my money to replenish the bank's money to make more loans. So that is where we have the secondary mortgage market regulations, the servicing guides, and Fannie Mae, Freddie Mae, Sally. They all have these set of regulations that they have to follow on the loan origination side and the servicing side. So that is where a lot of the resale certificate process comes in. The lenders want to know, it's the most annoying question in Missouri on the condo questionnaire, is our lien priority, but that's the genesis of it. The banks are looking for this information to know what the loan has done. So when the loan is sold, the loan originator now has more funds to make additional loans, keeping the cycle going. And we could make a joke about 2008 and their wonderful lenders, but no reason to beat a dead horse. So secondary mortgage market for condominiums. It is a young form of ownership, whether you like it or not. We're less than 100 years old. And when it comes to law, that's amazingly young. So in its origin, the condominiums are really a way of three-dimensionally dividing property. It doesn't have to be residential. We're used to residential. It doesn't have to be. In Chesterfield, there is a man cave, for lack of a better term. It's a man cave condo. At the Lake of the Ozarks, we have condominiums. It does not have to be real estate. It's just a cube of airspace. So we also have leasehold timeshares, live work, all these different things. So because of that diversity, you also have more regulation to understand from a lender perspective, well, what is this loan? What is this collateral? What's really there? And that's where the interconnectedness of the owners and the financial risk come into play. If I want to make a loan for a condominium, I need to know that because there are different rules, even as a lender, there are different rules than if it is a residential one. So just something as simple as what are you creates different risks. And those different risks have different consequences. So for the most part, we can stay with the residential. And what do we look at? Again, what is the risk to loan repayment? They start with the borrower. We don't say any of that stuff. We don't get to pick who our owners are, even though we really secretly wish we could. And then there's the risk of non-payment on the overall community. It's a question of, what happens if other people don't pay? What happens if you start to have deferred maintenance, the cycle gets started, non-payments, and then what does that do? That cycle starts continuing, delinquencies. Now the people paying have to make up the shortfall. And it's not hard to see how something as simple as everyone needs to pay their fair share can become a problem from a lender perspective to make sure that their loan is being repaid. And again, to me, it's a quirk. I think eventually it's going to change, but right now, the lending regulations for non-condominiums is non-existent. Eventually, they're going to figure out that when you have attached housing to each other, like a villa community, there's really no difference in terms of risk. It's all about what are those shared systems. How the property is divided is actually less important than what are those shared systems? How does that work? So for condominiums, it's just more complex, and that's the genesis of why we are a pain in the rear to everybody. So let's get into Fannie Mae. The LL is for a lender letter. Obviously, then it's the year, and then they just give it a number for it to order. So that's how you can always read those. When you see the LL, what's important to recognize is that is a lender regulation. We are not directly regulated by Fannie Mae or anybody else. We are indirectly regulated by them because their regulations change, so they ask different questions of us, and now we have to go through it. So they have now defined, after the tragedy in Champlain, with Champlain South in Florida, we now have what is defined as new ineligible projects. Anytime you see a project or the term used for project, you can instantly make a switch in your head that we are talking about lenders. We're talking about FHA, Fannie Mae. They call condos projects. And it's just the term of use. It's not meant to be any loaded term. It's just what they do. So anytime you see ineligible projects, what they're saying is you're an ineligible condominium. So the first new one is significant deferred maintenance, full or partial evacuation of the condominium, And then you can see deficiencies, defects, substantial damage, or deferred maintenance that impact structural safety, soundness, or habitability. Improvement needs substantial repairs and rehabilitation, which may include major components. And impeded safety, sound functions, or more, the major structural or mechanical elements. So typically I don't read from slides, but for this presentation, I am more because you are seeing it. If you want to Google Fannie Mae and use that LL 2021-14, it's not a lengthy letter, may be helpful, but we did purposely put it in here so it's in here so you have it. So how are they going to test for this? That's ultimately the bigger question, and we don't actually know. We don't know. One mortgage lender we've already seen one new questionnaire, and I'll go back just so I don't confuse on special. How are they going to test for this? We really just don't know. One lender, I have seen one condo questionnaire. If you get another questionnaire, please forward it to Kathy or myself so we can try to share in the knowledge in terms of how the lenders are deciding this. But one mortgage company has simply updated their questionnaire, and they're making us answer these questions. And if you are, I don't know, if a board asks me to sign off on it, I'm not just saying yes or no. I might say to the best of the knowledge of the information I have today, maybe. But if you're a manager, that you will have to talk with your supervisors to understand the risks of answering that question. And it may not be able to be answered. And do not feel compelled. Sadly, I do know some loan originators, some realtors will push on you. Just say yes. Or if you answer this way, this goes through. And that's why it's so important to educate our owners that this is coming, because we're not doing that. We are not here to make sure loans go through. We're here to provide the information and knowledge we have that's reasonable, and that's it. So make sure you're talking to the powers that be in your specific community, and if you're a board member, start potentially planning on how to do it. The one idea that I've had that I don't even know if it would work is if you've had a recent reserve study, you might be able to get that engineer to sign off that based upon their reserve study and their visual inspection. Because remember, reserve studies are not structural analysis, but based upon the reserve study, they have no reason to believe that they have any issues. I have no problem signing off if there is a full or partial evacuation, because that's government. That's easy to know. You just say, no, we're not aware of any government entity ever telling us of a full or partial evacuation. So that one's not bad, but the deficiencies and defects, that's tough because it's also squishy in the way it's phrased. So it is what it is. So ineligible projects, if you're also going to have a special assessment, the lender must must document the reason for it, the total amount assessed for repayment terms, documentation, no negative impact on the financial stability, viability, condition, or marketability of the project, and borrower for qualification with any outstanding special assessment payment. So this really has two parts. One is there's a special assessment, can the borrower afford it? Making sure it's part of the calculation. And then the rest of it is really relates to they're just looking for the background. And the test that they have is a special assessment relates to safety, soundness, habitability, or structural integrity. Then the special assessment project must be fully completed. If not, project is ineligible. So if you have a rolling project that's done in phases that deals with some level of structural habitability, soundness, or safety, you're out. You're out. So you have to start planning now. Now, I don't know whether they knew this, recognize this or not. If you don't have a special assessment, they don't ask. So if you are properly in Missouri law, remember, special assessments are disfavored in condominiums in Missouri because you do not get lien priority for them. If you are properly phasing in and have the increase of assessments for these types of things, you do not have to provide these additional documentation unless they ask, because it's already part of the budget. So the special assessments relates to safety, soundness, and habitability. You can avoid the test by not having specials. And generally speaking, yes, for a long time in Missouri, special assessments was a very predominant way of creating and filling in the gaps. And for a long time now, we've been pushing on stop it. Get the reserve study, do a real financial plan, follow the tools best you can. Doesn't mean you're not going to have, of course, you're going to have increases. Things only get more expensive. But by having the financial planning done, you just have more margin of error. And if you're a smaller condominium, that margin of error is incredibly tight just because of your size. So financial planning is just incredibly important. So continued on this letter, reserve requirements. Reserve study is not required but recommended. What Fannie Mae has recognized, which is the next one, is that not all reserve studies are created equal. So 10% of the budget under all circumstances is required even if a reserve study is being strictly followed. Lender can submit for an exception request. Again, I look at it as, is it worth it? Maybe if you guys truly are fully funded and can show that, yes, you guys are sitting on such great reserves that there really is no reason to have more reserves than 5%. Otherwise, I'm going to suggest for the short term, don't bother, increase your budget to 10% for reserves and be done with it. And it's important, this is another aspect of, it's vital to understand and educate owners as to why this is being done, even if you're fully reserved. There are bad reserve studies, the lenders are requiring it, this is the increase you're getting. Now, the advantage to the owners is, it's not like the money is just going into some black hole either. It's just going to overinflate reserves early on. I'm optimistic that eventually Fannie will kind of figure out that they're oddly creating a disincentive to have the reserve studies, because if you do have a quality reserve study and it is fully funded, you're good. And now you really are holding on to too much money. And it also creates a disincentive to get the reserve study at all, because you guys say we need 10% no matter what. And I just think it creates a little bit of a false sense of, well, if we have 10%, we're good. And it's just not. Don't get sucked into that. You still should do the reserve study. Still see what your long-term financial plan is. Don't play games with that. So, best practices and reminders. These things are going to be required. So you should be doing these anyways. If your board is not doing them, Fannie Mae is kind of using these as a, if you're not even doing these basics, we have a problem. 6 months of minutes. So as part of the resale certificate, just have them uploaded. Have them uploaded and ready to go. If you're meeting quarterly, I would make sure that the minutes have something clearly in there as to why you generally meet quarterly. Maybe it's something as simple as, hey, we authorize the management company to continue to pay our contractual invoices, insurance, and utilities. Because if you're meeting quarterly and your minutes are very, very thin, it's a red flag, and we all know it. And it doesn't mean you're not doing it. Of course, you guys are doing the work. It's like the old elementary school when we didn't want to show our math. We just knew or we thought we knew the answer. Don't. Show your work. Show your work. So this is where, again, how are lenders going to do it? Don't know. But if you have the minutes you should be having, you're going to be okay. If your board does not have minutes, they need to have minutes, and they need to go back and clean that up ASAP, because these regs are effective January 1. So they're going to be looking for minutes from July forward. So, and they are fixable. Minutes are fixable. It just has to be done through ratification motions at the depth that's needed. And there's nothing wrong with saying we're doing this in recognition that the lenders are scrutinizing it. There's nothing wrong with being transparent about it. So just be transparent about it. They're going to obtain information about maintenance or construction that may have significant safety, soundness, structural, or habitability impacts. Same thing. I mean, we already have the documentation. So if there is an issue, just share it up front. If you don't have anything, I think that's going to be more of a red flag. I think if you even have something that says our roofs are in year 10 of 30, no water leaks, no drainage issues, things like that. Even in the minutes, even though we wouldn't necessarily put that in there, having that in there is telling the lender very important information, and we're just talking about a few sentences. So even if you're in between the big projects, there's nothing wrong with saying that, just roughly, hey, how are sidewalks doing? Sidewalks are great, no concrete issues. Perfect. There's nothing wrong with saying and adding in the minutes. It's also an easy thing to do every 6 months. So it's a rinse and repeat, especially if you're in the middle. Now, if you're not in the middle and you have the big project, just put the documents up there. Usually, I shouldn't say that. depending on the community, you know, since we're built to a finished state, things tend to come up all at the same time. So part of what associations should try to do, if they can, in dealing with the experts, is try when those repairs are done to restagger it. So if you're doing roofs at 50 years and your siding is a lifespan of 50, maybe you go with a longer roof to try to adjust it, or you just get the numbers and properly reserve right up front. Or if you're doing a lot of concrete, well, we know this area the concrete just gets worn away faster. Well, then look at alternatives. Find ways to break up that finished state repairs to make it a little bit more palatable. Review available inspection, engineering, or other certificate reports completed within the last 5 years to identify deferred maintenance. We all have deferred maintenance. There's no way to avoid that. So I often joke that just don't hide it. Recognize what it is, tell them what it is, and show them what the plan is. I will always give the example of, let's say you have a 20-year roof and you have no water leaks. There is nothing wrong with extending that life. Yes, that is deferred maintenance. Just have the roofing report say, yes, while this is beyond its life expectancy, you're okay this year. And then you have the roofer come out and do it again. There's no reason to, it's out of its life expectancy, now it's automatically deferred maintenance, we have to replace. You don't have to do that. You just have to document and show your work that not only are you deferring maintenance, but you have the money that when it is ready to go, that you've adjusted for the cost increase of that delay. And roofs are a great example of, I mean, it's many times. It's not leaking, let's get another year out of it. Great. That is still okay. You just need to document. So the appraisers must document special assessments or deferred maintenance that impacts the safety, structural, and habitability. And the one report that we have right now is essentially they are cramming it down onto us by asking the question, but I don't know if lenders are going to do that entirely. So how do we prepare now? Budget and reserves, we absolutely have to get in front of telling the owners that if needed, our budgets, I think that's what annoyed me the most about what Fannie Mae did. If you did this in June or July, we could have not have to redo our budgets. We could have done it right from the start, but it is what it is. So if you are short 10%, you are not going to be eligible. So if you're under 10%, you might as well just amend your budget now and throw Fannie under the bus. It is what it is. So adjust the budgets, advise the owners of the upcoming changes. Think of it this way. Someone is going to have a sale be delayed if you're not more proactive on cleaning up the budget. Something as simple as 10%. We just got to get ahead of it. So special assessments, realistic and open budgeting. Don't start with a rate of assessment, work backwards. See, guys, ad nauseum, we say this almost any time we talk about finances. So if you have a board that says, I'm not doing an increase in assessments, that's where, as a manager, as a lawyer, I am doing a CYA that you are starting from the wrong point. Your budget must be realistic based upon the association's needs. If you are working backwards, you better have found savings that are real. So for example, if you're doing a lot of concrete concrete replacement, well, now you're saving on concrete repair, that might make sense. But in the same year, it's going to be more expensive than the other. So you have to actually be the year following all the replacement before you would see that savings, not that first year. So it's really important for board members to recognize that all of our stuff is more expensive. It's not about necessarily supply chain, it's volatility in the marketplace. We don't know what these prices are going to be, let alone even if we had the materials. There's still worker issues in getting it on. And I'll pick on Wolkoff at Beckner because I happen to call him for something. He's pretty busy, and that's not a bad thing. It just makes it harder when we're preparing for these projects of, are the materials and the teams going to be ready and available for us? And we even had this in the St. Louis marketplace after 2008, flushed out a lot of companies. So the market was already contracting for the quality workmanship. And you also don't want to go cheap either. You don't want to do they're available, we need this now, we're doing it. That may not be the best option, because then you might end up spending more money with the lawyer or insurance and everybody else trying to get a poorly done project done fixed. So special assessments, realistic. If an association has one, get all the documents ready as it relates to it, get it up in the portals for the resale certificate process, Don't mess with it. Get it up now. Minutes and reports, same thing. Just make them available. To me, this is coming up in the resale certificate process, so that makes the most sense to get that documentation up. In terms of new inspections, I am aware of some associations and some clients that after the tragedy, they just went ahead and spent the money to have a structural analysis done for their, it's always been a high rise. Some of them have done it. It hasn't been necessarily the most expensive thing. It helps for the ones that I'm aware of. They weren't even 20 years old yet. So they were a little early in terms of what some of the recommendations are, but they went ahead and did it. Okay, get that report, get it up there, get it up on the portal, share it. Show that you're being proactive, because if an appraiser has questions and there's an issue, they can always go back to that engineer report and say, well, look, the engineer said it was good and it's part of the package, so they're going to be good to go. So isolated unit-to-unit issues, document and share, but that does not make you ineligible. So if you have a water leak from one unit to another, even though it usually impacts more than one, Fannie Mae is not necessarily interested in that. I don't know. I highly doubt Fannie Mae is going to get that granular. I just look at it as it's just a good reminder to document and share it. If you're sharing it, and you don't even have to use the owner names, you can just say we have these pending issues with water leaks. Have it in the portal. Every couple months, you refresh to see what's up there. As an appraiser, what it's showing you is the association is being transparent. And I think the more transparent, the more it looks like we're doing the right thing, the more likely the appraisers are going to be willing to take on the risk of, they have no reason to believe that the structural issues are around, because we may not be answering those questions. So isolated unit-to-unit issues does not make your project ineligible, but it's still something that we should be having in documentation. Also recognize that storage of data is cheap. So make the electronic file, keep it up there, and be done. Okay, so again, what's the goal? Prevent disaster and loss of life. Don't forget, trust me, when I lose time reading all this stuff, it's easy to lose sight of what the real goal here is, and it is to prevent disaster and loss of life. And that's not nothing. So recognize the value of what and why we're doing this. We're doing it to show that our communities are safe and structurally sound. And remember that the burdens are falling on the lenders and appraisers, and they're not even sure necessarily what they're going to do yet. So that's more work on their side. So the easier we can make it for them, I think it's at the end of the day, it's more information that owners and lenders should be there. And I'm not saying we have to fully embrace it, but I think if we embrace it, we're going to be just fine to show that we're better in many ways. Hey, go down the street and see if they have the level of documentation and financial planning that we have. Make it a selling point, because it should always have been. Go look down the street. Do they have a reserve study that's worth it? No. Guess what you're going to get eventually? A problem. So build that trust in the stakeholders by doing these things up front. Build those best practices in minutes and reporting. That carries through to the owners. Better practices in planning to avoid special assessments, whether it's through reserve studies or additional studies. One thing I'd also love for Fannie Mae to recognize is, not only are reserve studies all the same, is some associations, just the way they've developed, you can back into a reserve study. So, if you're a smaller community and all you have is a roof and building envelope issues, no amenities, you may not even have much in terms of a parking lot. You don't necessarily need the full extent of a reserve study in the traditional sense that we think of. So I'm hoping there's, we get a little bit more flexibility, but it is what it is. This reduces the potential for lost sales, which can negatively impact property values in the overall community and community unity, because guess who's going to get blamed for a lost sale? It is not going to be the lender. The realtor is going to be, and the lender are absolutely going to throw us under the bus. It's not right, but it is what it is. So the more we can demonstrate to the owners that, hey, if the appraiser finds that we're ineligible, we gave them everything we possibly could, and that's the end of it. And we just have to, and that's why the other part, again, in talking with the owners, we need to say, we know this is coming. We know you are going to hear from a lender. Someone is going to complain that we're not sharing. And it's not true. we're sharing everything we possibly have and can have. And if that's not good enough, we're just not sure what else they want from us. So there's no reason for us to take the burden off of that. So with that, Dawn, I'll let you do it. I'll just do Dawn. Was it last week or week before that you guys did the national presentation on this?
Last week.
It was last week. So I know it was very well attended. And again, please read it. Here's my printed copy. Please read it. It's really, really important. It's really, really valuable. And with that, Dawn, you get to take over.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, Todd. A couple of things I want to reiterate and emphasize. So one, the Fannie Mae lender requirements that will go into effect in January are for condominiums and housing cooperatives. So both housing co-ops and condos, you may not have a lot there in the Heartland area, but it's for condominiums and housing co-ops. And it's for condominium housing co-ops with 5 or more units in their multifamily housing project. So that's important. Freddie Mac will likely be releasing some guidance as well for lenders. I expect that to be very similar to the Fannie Mae guidance. So keep that in mind. Todd mentioned the need to communicate with owners. I want to emphasize that. I think it's really important, especially if you have a mechanism in place where you can communicate with owners who are looking to sell so that they understand what is going to happen in the process. I think that's really important for you to share with owners so they're not caught by surprise by some of the information that's being asked for and then subsequently shared with the lenders and the appraisers. Todd also mentioned the fact that this is on the lenders and the appraisers. However, they're already asking questions on their lender questionnaires. They're already asking questions of board members and managers saying, hey, is this building safe or not? Basically, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but they're asking those questions. You don't have to answer yes or no to those questions. But what is important is to provide the information that you have and the documentation that you have to support an answer to that question. So you can say, you have to answer the question. So you could say, see, attached documentation, attach the minutes, attach a reserve study, attach a maintenance plan, whatever it happens to be, so that they can make their determination. But you don't have to give a yes or no answer to that question unless you feel very, very confident that the answer is no. And I still would suggest that you talk with your attorney about that. Todd, did you want to comment at all on that emphasis?
Yeah, I mean, that's where, most managers you guys face the brunt of it. So that's where it is. You just have to write this. Under Missouri law, you have no obligation to answer anything outside of the resale certificate that's part of the statute. So if they ask for more, that is where the internal controls of what you do matter. There are some associations where when it's the longer one before all these changes, where our office was the one that did it. But if they ask structural questions, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to answer that. There's too much risk, and I'm not an engineer. I'm not even qualified to answer it. So I think it's one thing to do no, we're not aware of any evacuations. We would know that, but the other stuff we just wouldn't know. So a lot of risk.
So not a no, but a C supporting documentation will then give the lenders and appraisers the opportunity to have information so they can answer the question on their own. Okay. Moving along, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Condominium Safety Public Policy Report that was just released following the Champlain Tower South condo collapse 4 months ago. CAI put together a group of hundreds of volunteers with expertise across the board to look at what CAI can do to provide public policies, legal law recommendations, education and best practices so that something like this doesn't happen again. We knew that we had the expertise in our membership of 43,000 members to be able to convene a really strong group of experts to have these conversations. So we identified 3 major topic areas to initially look at public policy and education best practice recommendations. One being building maintenance and structural integrity, one being reserves, studies, and funding, and the other being insurance and risk management. So for the recommendations that what we did was then we had weekly meetings to talk about these issues so that we could come up with our public policy report that Todd has in his hand. And you can find on our website at caionline.org/condo safety, which includes an extensive deep dive into our policy recommendations. Okay, next slide, Todd. Thank you so much. Next slide also, I just went through that one, sorry. And keep going. Okay, awesome. So building inspections and maintenance. So this is a big one, and this is new. This is new to the community association housing model, new to condominiums. The only place in the country where there are condominium structural inspection requirements is in Florida, Miami-Dade County, Broward County. So where Champlain Towers South was, there was already a process in place that required at 40 years that a building would have to go through an extensive structural engineer analysis and electrical engineer analysis to determine if that building is structurally sound and safe and maintained. Champlain Towers South was in the process of going through that. While there are some other laws throughout the country, mainly at a local municipal level, like a New York City, Boston, Chicago, they have facade inspections. So the local building inspector will have a responsibility to check the outside, the exterior of the facades of these buildings. However, our team did a deep dive into what other countries do because we found stronger regulations for structural integrity in other places like Singapore, Madrid, Ontario, Australia. There were some really strong guidance for us to be able to look at as we were developing our policy recommendations. What's important is the building type that we are making a recommendation for building inspections and maintenance is just a specific building that would constitute the building type of a high-rise multifamily building. Now, you can go to the next slide, Todd. What's important to note is we first started with the developer requirements, and we engaged developers in this process to make sure this was something that they thought was practical, feasible, and something they would buy into. And we did get their buy-in. So first, the developer would be required to have construction drawings for further reference for the association and an inspection during construction to make sure that the construction ties back to those approved construction drawings. Also, the developer would be required to transfer a maintenance manual for that condominium or co-op building to the association upon transition. And then disclosure to purchasers on the inspection schedule and projected cost. Included in this recommendation is that the budget that the developer would transition over would include a budget for a reserve study, reserve funding, as well as an inspection report. So what are the association requirements? Again, this is what CAI is recommending. We went through a whole process to come up with this recommendation that we vetted through our legislative action committees, we vetted through our membership, and was approved by the CAI Board of Trustees on October 28th. I remember that because it's my husband's birthday. And it was quite a celebration to get all of this work done and approved October 28th. So the requirements for the association is for a periodic inspection, building inspection. The first inspection would happen at 10 years. The second inspection would happen 10 years later at 20 years, and subsequent inspections would happen at 5 years, unless the previous inspection said, oh, there's a problem, you should probably do this a little bit more frequently. So that sounds like a lot of inspections. We did an analysis with the cost of deferred maintenance versus inspections and regular maintenance. So with some other studies, we identified that on deferred maintenance, or maintenance that's put off and needed, is really what we're saying. The maintenance expense is typically 30% higher than it would have been if it were done on time and on a regular basis. So these inspections, the cost of these inspections really could be offset by the maintenance expenses that would be potentially much more costly in the future if this maintenance is continually put aside. Now, these recommendations, this is what we're recommending to lawmakers to consider to adopt in different states. Now, legislative action committees have the opportunity to see if it's the right time for them to be able to pursue this legislation. Some legislators are not interested, some are interested. So it's not CA is not running to the state houses right now saying, pass this legislation. But if legislators are saying, hey, we're looking for a solution, we're saying we have the solution, here's what you should consider. My guess is we'll continue to hear from legislators in 2022 just to see if they agree, if they don't agree. We'll continue to have conversations with engineers, with reserve specialists, with developers, with managers, with homeowner leaders and others, just to see if this is working. I was in Florida, I'm in Florida right now, but I was in Florida 2 weeks ago in Tallahassee meeting with legislators. And what I'm hearing from them in Florida is maybe we look at a 20-year inspection for buildings on the coast and a 30-year inspection for buildings that are not on the coast, that are inland. Obviously, there are some coastal impacts on buildings, and that's understandable. An interesting fact, as we were putting these together, these recommendations, we were looking at a variety of data and statistics. Interestingly, nearly more than 70% of the buildings in the US are 30 years old or older, nearly 70%. So my guess is there are some building inspections that may need to be done. Now, that doesn't mean that there are 70% of the buildings are going to fall down. That doesn't mean that there are maintenance or structural issues. But what that means is the lenders that are looking to evaluate their risk and Fannie Mae's risk in these buildings that are a lot, 70% of them more than 30 years old, they're going to be looking for the documentation that Todd just talked about earlier. One of the important pieces of our recommendation is communication with owners, regular communication, simple communication, and also giving the board the authority to either special assess or borrow money if they need to make immediate repairs without going to the membership for a vote. Now, those immediate repairs would be for life, health, safety specific repairs that are needed. I just put this in there because it's important to share with legislators on a state-by-state level. Legislators, believe it or not, they look to see what other states are doing. They look at neighboring states. Texas, Florida like to see what each other's doing. They don't care what California's doing. California likes to know what Washington and Oregon's doing, maybe Colorado. You know, it just kind of depends where the political allies lie. But interestingly, there are 9 states that require reserves for condominium or reserve study for condominiums. There are 11 states that require reserve funding. I know the question, how can that be? Well, that means that they're assuming that there's a reserve study as well. And there are 33 states that require disclosure at the time of resale about reserves, and 30 states that require disclosure on a regular basis during that budget process to all owners. So that is pretty significant. Interestingly, you can go to the next slide tab, but interestingly, CAI, we do our homeowner satisfaction survey on a regular basis every other year, and overwhelmingly people are happy living in their associations. But randomly, we ask random questions every year. 2 years ago, we asked the question, and this survey polls people who are not CAI members. We use Zogby International. They use their own list to find people to answer these questions. So they don't necessarily know what the folks at CAI know, what CAI members know about best practices, et cetera. And it's something like, we asked about reserves. Do you support reserve funding in your community? Does your community association have a reserve study? And does your community association have reserve funding? More than 60% of the people who responded said, yes, we have a reserve study. Yes, we have reserve funding. Yes, I support reserve funding in our community. And actually that last question, do you as an individual owner support reserve funding in your community? It was more than 70% of those who responded to that question. So while we become concerned sometimes about, oh, people aren't going to want to fund reserves, you know what? Overwhelmingly, people do want to fund reserves and they understand the importance of funding reserves. But I think what happens is sometimes you get towards an annual meeting and you get somebody who says, vote for me, I'm not going to raise your assessments, and then we don't even have to fund reserves. And you're like, yeah, I'm a little tight this year on money. So you decide to vote for them. I think those days are behind us a little bit. I do want to share information about the National Reserve Study Standards. Todd, I'm going to ask you to go through this and just get to the policy recommendations, because these reserve study standards, oh, perfect, that's perfect, are actually in our our best practices report. I'm going to give you a link to that later, and you can go find those reserve study standards. What's really important as board members and managers is to understand the reserve study standards and to understand what each reserve study means. We have some great resources on the topic that's free, so I hope you take advantage of that. Okay, our reserve study and funding policy recommendations. CAI supports state law that mandates all associations, there's one exemption, have a reserve study. All associations, unless your association has common property that the replacement value is $10,000 or less. Now that's what we want to see in state law, because there's a cost of ownership in a housing cooperative and a condominium. And to save slowly but surely for the replacement of major components is the only fair and equitable way to do it. So mandatory reserve studies, also mandatory reserve funding. So based on the reserve study, mandatory funding. We also support state law that gives associations an opportunity to kind of catch up on getting that fund into place. So we certainly don't want to create a financial crisis for any of these condominium or co-op buildings that all of a sudden a law passes and they just don't have the money to be able to catch up on reserves. We want to make sure that there's an opportunity for them to catch up. Another is another CAI supports state law that communicates effectively and directly to owners about where they stand. Yes, we have a reserve study. Hawaii has this great disclosure. It basically says, yes, we have a reserve study. No, we don't have a reserve study. If we are funded to where we're supposed to be funded, it would be hypothetically $100,000. We actually have $98,000. So we're $2,000 short. If we were to special assess today, all 100 units, it would be, what is that, $200? $20 per unit, something like that. So it's a very clear disclosure statement that goes out to all unit owners and homeowners annually during the budget process, which I think is important that all owners know this. And I know that we're probably preaching to the choir of the 78 people on this call who already know this and already do this, but that kind of communication is important. If you have access to folks who are self-managed associations, not manager on site, but self-managed by volunteers, and there's any way we can share these best practices with those folks, I think will make the condo HOA world much better. Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Okay, this is important. So we do not support, CAI opposes state law that would allow owners to waive or opt out of reserve funding. Florida has that law right now. It actually is, I've heard it to be problematic anecdotally, and we oppose that state law. We also oppose state laws that restrict borrowing from reserves. We think that having a structure in place that is a tight structure that allows borrowing and repaying from reserves during a critical time, we think it's important. We also think building inspections and integrity inspection reports should be eligible expenses in a reserve study or in a reserve fund. These are the resources I mentioned that I'd love for you to go download from our website: the best practices report on reserve studies and management, as well as the condo safety public policy that we just recently released. That's what I have ready for questions.
Hold on a second. Let me pull up the first one.
Kathy, do you want?
Yeah, I've got
Kathy,
one
you want me to
already.
stop sharing? Yeah, but you want me to stop sharing?
Sure,
Okay.
that's fine. First one is, do management companies, associations have to supply minutes and other information free of charge?
If they are a Missouri nonprofit, they can charge for it. I think it makes sense to upload it into the resale certificate process because you're already paying, they're paying it there. So in Missouri, there are no regulations on the fee for the resale certificate. Don't go crazy. Ohio, some people went crazy in Ohio, and there's a batch of cases out of Ohio, so don't go crazy, but you can recoup some of these costs out of that.
And that's also, there's no federal regulation, there's no lender regulation that says you have to provide this free to the lender. But I will tell you, in states where there's a pain point between a real estate agent and a banker and the association, where they're not able to get the documentation that they're looking for as quickly as they want it, which is yesterday always, and we know that, they go to the legislature and they try to do whatever they can to get legislation passed so that they don't have to wait anymore. Legislation that I've seen around the country includes all associations have to have their own website, and that website has to include all of this documentation. Associations have to upload all of this information into a database posted by the Real Estate Commission. So like Todd said, don't go crazy. There are no federal laws that prohibit you from charging fees, but I would say there's probably always that reasonableness fee that needs to play a role.
Next one is, can you guys explain or go a little deeper into the 10% into reserve funds, like what exactly that includes? Does that include realtor income? I'm sorry, not realtor, excuse me, rental income.
Now, the 10% is the 10% of your assessment income, but don't play games with we separated out the reserve fee to do it and try to, don't try to play games with it. In other words, don't try to separate out the assessment income in a way to try to avoid it. Assessment income is X, 10% of that is a contribution to reserves. So the numbers, it doesn't, just do the rough math. I mean, usually you can just tell. 80,000 in income, there should be 8,000 in contribution to reserves.
So Todd, it's funny that this question always comes up when I talk about this topic, and I know why it comes up, because it doesn't make any sense. It's completely arbitrary. So if you're trying to find logic in why that 10% exists, nothing. Fannie Mae is just like, I think that makes sense. We're going to make it a 10% rule. So to answer the question, probably with some background and insight, arbitrary, but has to be done.
Let's see. Anybody else see any more questions?
There's another question. So the question is, when you're managing a condo that is 30 years old, there's always maintenance that needs to be done. How do you recommend, I'm assuming the property managers answer the deferred maintenance question? Should we have standard statements such as complex is 30 years old, we're engaging in the services of a structural engineer, we'll address his concerns, we are currently replacing joist hangers and stair brackets, for example, or should they have the attorney write a standard statement?
My suggestion is, well, one, if you already have an architect or an engineer, is see how far they're willing to go, because they're the ones with the best knowledge. So if they are willing to commit to, this is the project, there is no life and safety today as much as, you know, we're just going to be better off in the future. So I would push on the engineer or architect if you can on those life safety questions, and then share it. I look at the deferred maintenance as the lawyer is only going to give a to our best knowledge we're not aware of some blanket statement, and we don't know if the appraisers are going to take it. We just don't. So that's why I look at the more transparent we can be about where we're at in our processes, that's where the appraiser can best evaluate risk of, well, yeah, they're replacing the joist hangers, but the engineer even said this is really just good maintenance. So I'm going to sign off that this is a structural issue that needs to be replaced today. It's just good preventive maintenance. So this is where we get into when the rubber meets the road, we really don't know to what extent it's going to work, and we're just going to have to be able to adapt. So the best thing we can do is try to do the good cleanup we can now as best we can, and adjust as more stuff happens and occurs.
You know, Todd, I wonder if also just referencing the maintenance manual and where you are in the maintenance, I mean, where you are in this maintenance schedule, or we are in the process of undergoing maintenance as required by our maintenance manual.
Yeah, I think the more we can show, it's kind of where there's nothing there. That's where I think the appraisers are going to get spooked.
Yeah.
So the more we can show that, look, based upon our needs, yeah, our elevator's old, but you know, XYZ elevator company says we're great. Share it. So by showing that we're being diligent on life safety, you know, most municipalities, you do the fire safety test. I think it's every year. Share it. Just share it. Show that you're trying to share that information. I think it's when wow, we really didn't get much here. I think it's just my gut feeling that's where the appraisers are really going to get spooked. And it's also going to make more hassle for you later, because now someone already has a pending sale. They're trying to get financing, and now you're scrambling to get this stuff.
Yep.
A lot of people are asking if we're sharing the slides and the resources. Absolutely. I will, in fact, send them as soon as I can, probably later today to you guys. So you guys have those. Next question, what defines a high rise?
So
nothing really. That's right. And I'm getting there. That's one thing that I think was actually great about what CI did. And you got to give them credit. These were not sham committees. These guys put in amazing hours to come up and recognize the differences in construction. So, and that's really what I like, is we're also not making anything new. We're following and I'm going to forget the acronym, and I'll let Dawn take over from here. So, yeah. We're using their recommendations on when it comes to these structures and inspections. So when it comes to that, we're really relying on that. Now, what happens in terms of the legal answer, what is a high rise? Everyone's all over the place, because in St. Louis, you know, we even have a cap that you can't go higher than the arch in the city. So what constitutes a high rise is, luckily we can say we don't care. What we do care about is what is the type of construction, and what should our inspections be based upon that.
And I will say, if you go to the International Code Council, what constitutes a high rise is 7 stories or higher. That's their definition. We don't use that definition because we use again, a framework that describes a building that we think needs inspection. Now, Fannie Mae, their temporary guidelines are for projects, buildings with 5 or more attached units. So that's not a high rise, but that's what their requirements are for.
Next one, are buildings that have been completely renovated considered 30 years old? For example, loft conversions in most urban areas are 100+ years, but were renovated in the 2000s.
I think my suggestion would be this: if you are in the, well, here's the underlying problem that's a little bit, it's probably unique to more Missouri than, well, I know Illinois. If you're relying on a city or county inspection for structural, don't. There is no risk or liability in Missouri for them if they get it wrong. So don't. So when it comes to construction, I think that's where it comes to, if you're a rehab building and the city signed off on it, again, as Dawn said, a lot of this isn't because we think there's going to be a rash of collapses. It really comes down to, do we really have an accurate understanding of our buildings? So if there is any doubt, if it's old masonry construction and the civil engineers say you should have the inspection, it's not going to hurt. And the ones that have done it, it was not crazy expensive for the peace of mind it provides. And all you need to know is, hey, maybe one side of our building, I know in Missouri, our south sides just get beat up more. Watch your maintenance. Watch, why are we getting more maintenance on one side of the building versus another? So just being aware of your unique circumstances. If your gut's telling you, let's just bring in an engineer, then bring in an engineer. It's so much peace of mind just to have an engineer come through and say, based upon what I'm seeing, and again, for the older buildings, most basements are probably open or it's a garage. There might be enough where they're not doing a lot of invasive inspections to figure out what's going on. So I look at it as, if your gut's telling you it's probably time to do it, then do it.
I'll also say, Todd, you mentioned the local building inspector and how they, have probably a safe harbor from liability and may or may not have the staff with the qualifications to conduct a building inspection that's needed. I will say that CAI is, our recommendation is based on having that inspection done by a qualified inspector. If the locality has a qualified inspector or access to or funding to support a qualified inspector, that's where we think those inspections should come from. Now, I understand the complications around that. It's not going to be as quick and it's not going to be exactly who you want, but this is also an obligation on, this is what we pay taxes for, and there is an obligation on the municipality to provide these types of services. There are also some funding mechanisms through the Federal Community Development Block Grant Program, where localities can access money in those accounts to be able to pay for those inspections. So I would love to see that happen. I think it's going to take a little longer than, I think that'll take some time.
Yeah, and that's why I emphasize the Missouri part. Missouri law is just, they protect local governments from those risks pretty strongly.
Yeah, I think most states. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, and again, that's a great thing that is in the report is, and we didn't touch it in part of our thing, is that inspection program. Yes, I would love to have some type of government function where they know what they're doing, and I just don't know if they're there yet or will be soon, but it would be great.
Next one, how much of this applies to condo associations with single family detached units, villas?
It is, if you have more than 5 units and you are formally a condominium under Missouri law or any state law, it applies to you.
There's another question, in relation to townhouse, villa styles where a project was denied due to the lack of 10% funding. So do you feel that the townhouses and villas should budget 10% to protect the project or prevent project ineligibility?
If you are, honestly, the easiest way to make sure you're okay is to just budget 11 or 12%. Just don't try to skirt it, just go over. Again, I think this 10%, it's a quirk as to how we got it. Eventually, we're going to get more changes. So the question is, how do you best make it easier to just satisfy these requirements and not mess up sales? Just add in 1% or 2% to give you that buffer. What they want to see on your budget is your assessment income is X, down below in the expense side, reserve, and that's 10% or more than that other number. Everything else that's what they want to see. That's objective. There's no games to play with it, so don't. So I look at it as if you go a little higher, then go a little higher.
So Todd, I'll also add, we just had a conversation here in West Florida talking about the same exact topic. You know, Fannie Mae uses the term HOA to define condominiums. Also projects to define condominiums and housing co-ops. I would not be surprised if lenders apply this 10% reserve requirement to some older single family home homeowners association developments. I would, while not connected, not probably necessary or appropriate, I just wouldn't be surprised. So plan and prepare for it. Especially if you do have a reserve study and you do have reserve funding, just plan and prepare for it, because I think, especially in some of the larger, older communities, we'll probably see that random requirement.
And it's something as simple as, and Donnie make a great point of the terminology is all over the map. If you have the reserve study, that is a marketing tool for your community. Brag about it. I'm not saying, even if you're short, even if you're like, yes, we didn't want to bite off the funding, the increases, so we kind of stretch that out a little bit. Advertise that the heck out of it, because I guarantee you, especially on the HOA side, non-condos, reserve studies are even less common. So make it a marketing tool. Brag about your community and the things that you do right, because when they go down the street and they're not doing it, they're going to ask why. And then at the end of the day, they might go all being equal, I'd rather go with the association that's more transparent than not, if they're an educated buyer. And again, that's the larger problem we really have is a thing that none of us have ever been able to figure out, is how do we better educate buyers that have no idea what we are? It's just hard. So we have to do it as best we can. And if we have to overshare reserves and how strong we are financially and how good we are, then brag about it.
Another question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Kathy.
No, go ahead.
Is about deferred maintenance. If the deferred maintenance is equal to more than 10% of the income, which number do you use?
Well, again, they're looking at the assessment income number, 10% of that, and that's it. They're not looking at any other numbers. So just again, it's those two lines: assessment income, reserve contribution.
Right, for reserve contribution, not for deferred maintenance. Irrelevant. The deferred maintenance is irrelevant. I mean, it's very relevant, but it is not in this requirement of Fannie Mae.
Correct. What I think is maybe what the question might be going to is, what happens if you're budgeting 10% but you're spending 15%?
Fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then you might want to have a note on there to do the why is that happening, or if it's anticipated. Again, this is the year we're doing roofs. Of course, your budget is going to look a little skewed. Share the information as to why that's the case. But if you're doing it was a bad snow year, I think the appraiser is going to be like, wait a second. I can understand you having reserves. Blowing the budget because of snow, in Missouri, come on, that's plannable.
You know, Todd, you just made me think of an interesting solution, or part of a solution here. Perhaps that budget narrative that talks about maintenance and lists the maintenance that's going to happen in that community for that year based on the budget item. You know, that could be the answer to the question, right? Look at the narrative in the budget on what our planned maintenance is for the year.
And I mean, in the last few annual meetings where I've attended, there's usually some other piece of paper that talks about, here's the projects we did, you know, a year or two ago, here's the ones we did this budget year, here's what we're planning next year. So Dawn, it is a great idea, because instead of just having two, just keep adding it to the budget.
Yep.
And for condos, the vast majority of Missouri, especially after 83, we're doing budget ratification. Might as well put it in the budget and share it with the owners anyway.
We have another question. Are we required to upload the executive session minutes, or should the board create a second set of minutes? No.
Now this is easy. It's just the open regular session board minutes that need to be shared.
And I would say only those that are approved, right? So I feel like you can lag a month or whatever, that they don't have to be uploaded until they're approved.
Why do some lender questionnaires require a reserve study to be less than 3 years old?
Because Fannie
I think this just goes to best.
Fannie and Freddie have a requirement. They don't always enforce it, but Fannie and Freddie have that requirement. But
I would also add that realistically, that's about roughly the timeline that should, and it's not necessarily a full update, but you might be doing the short update, and that's what it is. It's making sure, it just popped in my head. I am aware of one association that they spent the money, did all the work in 2014, then they haven't touched it. Now they're like, well, now it's too late. You have to start over. So I think that's part of it's a red flag if you're not.
We have a few people that are raising their hand. So I don't know if you guys go to Q&A or the chat, you can post your question. That would be great. If you guys want to do that. I'm not sure if we have any. Oh, we do have one more. Is CEI working with realtors to redefine value with curb appeal amenities to financial stability?
Well, I think it's always a challenge, and that's where it's really important for the association to educate the buyers and realtors. And what I often find is usually end up with the same kind of core group of realtors that consistently sell in a community. So I think we absolutely can. It just has to be and Dawn, you can talk more about national level. You know, for us, we're always trying to hammer away at, look, when you're buying a house in a community association, there is absolutely more value than just what you're seeing, whether it's the financial planning, whether there's, strong compliance, no delinquencies, good, just good legal documents, all of those, and just even a strong sense of community. If you guys have regular community events, brag. There's nothing wrong with putting in a resale certificate that every year we do these wonderful events. So I think as an industry, we do absolutely have to be better. And the easiest way to do that is typically through the resale certificate process, particularly when they're owners that don't have any experience in living in an HOA or a condominium.
And I would say our focus with the realtors is more on an emphasis of educating owners when they're purchasing in a community association. We do provide information. 4% of or community homes in a community association are typically 4% higher in property values than neighborhoods without a common interest community. So we do share that information and push that information to realtors. But our real issue is trying to educate them on making sure their owners or their clients are educated on the association and that they're actually reading the resale disclosure materials. And not just signing off on it.
Few more. How do they deal with an older building that has a 5-year-old reserve study?
Get it updated.
What else?
And remember, start planning for the updates. Don't start saving now. The easier to save over 3 years to do it every, spread it out. You know what it's going to be. That's the other thing that is nice. And generally speaking, once you get the reserve study, if you ask them, hey, in 3 years when we do the update, can you give us a ballpark? There's not much market volatility in that. So just ask and plan. Kathy, I think we lost you.
Is there a definitive list of expenditures that classify a reserve eligible versus regular budgeted maintenance?
Yes, if you go to the reserve best practice report, you'll see a list of components.
And then for a villa community with 50 villas, where the building consists of 2 villas, do they fall under a new directive from Fannie Mae?
If they're a condominium under Missouri law or Illinois, or if they're a condominium under state law, then they fall under this.
Okay. Is there a deadline to meet these requirements, or will loans be denied beginning January 1st?
They have to close it all depends on when the closing date is on the loan. If it closes after January 1, on or after, these regulations will apply.
Okay, and then please restate. By law, we have to get the resale cert out quickly. What about the banks that are requiring additional information?
So Missouri law, yes, there's a strict deadline for us to provide the resale certificate. Under state law, that is the only information we're required to provide. Realistically, that again, under these regulations, that's just not enough. The lenders are going to come back and ask for you, ask for additional information. If you play ostrich, those units are not going to sell. So it's a question of, again, when putting this together, was what I was absolutely trying to think of what's the most cost-effective way for us to get this additional information up there so we don't have to do more than the resale certificate. It's there. You guys just have to read it and decide for yourselves what to do with it. But no, after that, and then it's a question of, well, what are the questions asking? And who has the skill and the ability to answer that? Some of them might be, I still have to do some lender questionnaires. And yes, they pay for them. So it all depends on what they're asking and how they're asking it and who has the skill set and the knowledge to answer the question.
I think that's a great point. I love the suggestion. This is the first I'm actually hearing about this, is packaging it in a resale disclosure pack. I think it's fantastic. I've heard of some of the portals, document providers also doing a separate package for just this, kind of building structure integrity piece. That might be an option as well, but I love it as part of the resale disclosure packet.
To be mindful of everyone's time, I think we're going to stop taking questions since we're a little bit over, but I wanted to thank Dawn and Todd for pulling this webinar together. Like within like a week, you guys did it. So thank you for doing this. I know our members appreciate it. I will definitely send everything out to everybody. I just wanted to remind you a few things. Our holiday party, we are doing it in person, December 9th at the Elk Lodge again. Please register so we can plan for you to be there. We're collecting items for Angel's Arms again this year, paper products, laundry detergent, and what else do we have? Twin sheet sets would be great too. If you haven't voted for our online election, please go on and do that. It only takes just a minute to vote, and nominate somebody for a chapter award. We'd love to see you guys do that. I think that's all we have. You guys have anything else to add before we go for the day?
Well, I do. Again, Dawn, please pass along to everybody the appreciation of the amount of hours, and that, again, we hear committees, oh, they're doing committees, and no, you guys did absolutely amazing work in a really short amount of time. So please pass that along to everybody on behalf of our chapter, because it definitely makes my life easier in trying to figure out how to navigate it all, which means I know it impacts everybody. We have a roadmap now to try to avoid and protect each other. So thank you.
Indeed. And thanks for inviting me. This was a lot of fun. I always loved hanging out with you guys, and presenting with Todd is a lot of fun. So thanks for letting me be part of this.
Thank you, Don, for everything. We appreciate it. And Stacy, thanks for helping with the questions too. I appreciate you guys all. Have a great day, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too. Yes.
Bye. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.